All right. Well, welcome everybody to the Dissertation Chair and Committee Member Workshop. Today is Thursday, March 14th, 2024. Hope everyone's doing well. Um, we're going to ask everybody, if you can, put your name in the chat room. That way we have a record of attendance. Although, we didn't make attendance mandatory, but that way we like to keep a running record of who's been engaged, who's been coming to the meetings, and so forth. So go ahead and do that. My name is Enrique Murillo, and I'm one of the co-directors of this doctoral program. I'm a longtime professor. I've been on campus almost 30 years now. Not exactly 30, but I'm almost on the third floor, coming soon. And I was on the original committee, you could say the architects of this doctoral program when it started maybe 18 years ago now. But it wasn't until the last 3 years, 4 years, that I've become much more involved on this side of the curtain. And because of that, I've gained a whole new perspective, and including what we're going to talk about tonight. So, but before I go on, I'm going to ask my co-director to introduce herself.
Thanks, Enrique. Hello, everyone. I'm Karen Escalante. I am the co-director of the EDD program and the Homes Program Coordinator. This is my 5th year here at San Bernardino, CSUSB. I'm housed in teacher education and foundations, but also doing some work in the EDD program. So happy to be with all of you tonight. And I saw that AJ just joined. So AJ, welcome as well. I didn't get a chance to greet you. So
thank you.
All right.
Okay, so I don't want to give the impression that I'm Mr. Know-it-all and I know everything. Okay, so you all here who are in the virtual room know just as much as me, perhaps even more. So feel free to say, hey, Enrique, you left out something, or if you want to add something to it. I'm just gonna mention and talk about what we're going to talk about tonight, but not just the co-director, but any one of you, if you want clarification or if you want to add anything, feel free, so it flows more of a conversation. So it's not like a banking method where I'm depositing all this information into you. So is everybody ready? Okay, very good. All right. So the first thing that we do, and of course you all know this difference, but when we recruit students to our program, the first thing we talk about is what's the difference between an EDD and the PhD. We get many students who are looking for a PhD. They want to be university professors the way we are. They're more interested in kind of straightforward research, and they don't necessarily see themselves as practitioners in the field. And so for those people, once we have this conversation, then they realize, okay, well, maybe this is not the program. What we've been struggling to do over the last 3 or 4 years is really distinguish ourselves from the PhD, so that we're not a PhD light, but having an EDD is a very specific doctorate. And as you can see there, we kind of lay out some of the basic distinctions. But the focus for our program is this hands-on, field-based knowledge. And of course, we cater to working professionals. So that's why we have classes on the weekends, either after hours or Saturdays. And the kinds of topics that we talk about have to do with theory into praxis. So it's very practice-based the way we approach it. And of course, the legislation, or for those of you who are may not familiar, or you may not be from California originally, or don't know this history, that in 1960, California passed its master plan. And in that master plan, they talked about what is the role of the community college, what is the role of the Cal State University system, and what is the role of the UC system. And so those definitions served us at one point, but they've become much too rigid over the years. So almost 20 years ago, they made an exception to the master plan. There's only been 4 in the history of California, and so this doctoral program is only one of 4 exceptions or deviations from that California master plan. And in it, it specifies this is a 3-year program. Now, that doesn't mean everybody graduates in 3 years, but if you wanted to, and everything scaffolds and works into the next step, into the next phase, then you could finish in 3 years. So that's why there's this rush, what seems like a rush to finish in 3 years, but really it's the legislation. And the other thing that makes us different is that although we use the same standard 5-chapter dissertation, we are slowly coming into the way other EDD programs have become, where our dissertation is considered a dissertation in practice. We haven't gotten this far yet, but at some point, we really need to consider, are there any alternatives to the standard 5-chapter dissertation? Because we can, if we wanted to, we could do that. It takes a lot of work on our part, and we've been spending the last few years just trying to catch our breath and trying to do all these other things, but eventually that's needs to be part of the conversation. So anyways, we have a YouTube channel, so we found a lot of really good YouTube videos that also talk about the distinction between the EDD and PhD. This is pretty good if any prospective students ask you for your advice. Is this the right program for me? That's usually the first thing we do is say, hey, well, check out these videos on YouTube, and that way they can get a sense of, are they looking for a PhD, or is an EDD going to serve their purposes for what they envision their career to be? So, okay. I'm looking at the screen here. So, Karen, if you don't mind, if anybody wants to chime in, raise their hand, just let me know. So it may not be obvious to me. Okay, so what has been helping us align ourselves with the EDD is this Carnegie Project on the Education Doctorate. It's a project that's been around strongly for the last 12 to 15 years. And my understanding is that our program has always been a member of this Carnegie Project, but the history I've been told is that our leadership and our faculty had not been very engaged with this Carnegie Project. So one of the things that we did a few years ago is we became re-engaged with this Carnegie Project. And so we've tried to align ourselves with their learning objectives so that we can differentiate ourselves enough from the PhD. And so, and then there's a framework available there. The links are also on our EDD webpage. So are there any questions so far? Okay, cool.
Nothing that's coming up. And I did attend, CPED's convening at AERA last year and their fall conference virtually this year. So our program has been engaged recently. And of course, our dean is on the board now of CPED. So we do have that collaboration with them.
Very good. Okay, so then this is self-explanatory. I'm just sharing some of the definitions. So you can see that it really has to do with application, not just general knowledge. Uh, so it's still research. We're still generating new knowledge, except the knowledge has to solve what they call problems of practice, right? We're trying to solve issues out there. And just for reference, again, this is available. You can read it on your own, but this is the framework we've been trying to align ourselves with. And at our next meeting of the faculty, we're going to talk about the results of our 5-year study. We had the chancellor's office and an independent reviewer do sort of like an audit and review of the last 5 years of our doctoral study, and it portrays us in a very positive light and applauds us for the effort of aligning ourselves with CPED. CPED is really the #1 professional society that deals with EDDs. So, we seem to be right on track with what we're supposed to be doing. Okay. Here you can see as well problems of practice, dissertation and practice. So part of the problem I think that we have, including myself, I have a PhD, is that when we think of a dissertation, we've really been socialized to think in very rigid terms. It has to be that 5 chapters, it has to be this, it has to be that. And of course, we're concerned about, is it rigorous? Are we just giving the doctorate away? Those kinds of things. And so we've done many things to make sure that this is a rigorous program. We're not just giving away the doctorate. But it would really be important at some point to talk about alternatives to the standard 5-chapter dissertation. So that's the dissertation in practice. So, and then the laboratories of practice, that's something that we're still working on. We established a field-based course a couple years ago. And the idea here is that there should be certain contexts that our students should be able to engage with so they can learn and see for themselves. We talk a big game about equity and social justice and diversity and all these things, but what does it mean in real life? Like, what does it mean like in the everyday world? So that's something we need to improve ourselves as a program. What does equity look like on the ground? So they're just not they're not just fancy words, but we actually can create these laboratories where our students and we could see for ourselves what it means to proclaim social justice, but what does that look like in terms of on the ground level, working with real people in real educational contexts. Okay, so I'm sure you all know this already, but who attends our program? This go back to what we were saying earlier. We get folks for the most part, they have their career set. Not unless the person is really, really young, but we get folks in our 30s, 40s, and 50s, and we've had people even in their 60s that they don't plan to get a job working, teaching research or being a university professor. They plan to stay at the school district where they're at, or they have a nonprofit agency and then that they're trying to improve their nonprofit work. And so these are the folks we usually get. Okay, that's just an overview of what we're going to be talking about today, and I'll jump into it. Are there any questions thus far? Any comments?
We've
Karen?
had a few in the chat, but I've been able to address them. Yeah.
Oh, okay, very good.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay. What's the purpose of EDD? we need to solve problems of practice. When they say problems of practice, it doesn't it's not meant to be like a clinical approach, like we're sick and we're trying to, heal and so forth. That's not the analogy. But the analogy is of what use are all these educational theories if we can't translate it into the everyday lives and experiences of the people we're trying to serve. So the the dissertation topics of our students are supposed to solve problems of practice. They're not just straight theoretical issues, although many have been like that. And in a lot of ways, the dissertation topics of our students, many of them there's no distinction between that and that of a PhD student. But in theory, an EDD dissertation topic is supposed to be like a hands-on solving real world issues. So it's applied research. It's applying theory to practice. And we've had many students who've published their work. And just like a PhD dissertation, the EDD is not the students' life work. We know that. Many of our students, of course, and Angie, I saw her move her head. Our students get stuck thinking they're solving the problems of the whole world. They're like it's not meant to be an unattainable degree. The student, and this is probably the number one thing as a chair or a reader, is our students, of course, they were like us at one point when we were younger. We want to change the world, which is great. That's the kind of people we want. We want people who want to change the world. But then you get overwhelmed and you want to do too much. And so part of our job is to like kind of bring them down a little bit and say, okay, it has to be a topic that's manageable. And you only have to stand this tall. And so anyway, that's why I threw that in there. So feel free to comment if anybody wants to say anything. Okay, so as mentioned earlier, it's a 3-year cohort based. In this 5-year study, and again, we're going to talk about it next week or in a couple of weeks, whenever our meeting is. Our students really prefer this cohort based program. And I was part of a cohort when I got my doctorate, and the students really hold themselves accountable and they become lifelong friends from the experience of being in the cohort. So I think that's probably one of the strongest points of our program. There are many other programs where students can come in at any point, they can leave and then come back and so forth. But here we have the students, they all come in, they start at the same time, and they get to know each other really, really well. And they go for the first year and a half. Okay, so if it's a 3-year program, they go for the first year and a half in their cohort with everybody. But then after they take their comprehensive exams, and we'll talk about this later, but after they take their comprehensive exams, they break off and then they take courses that are specific to whether they work with the pre-K 12, or whether they're working in higher ed community college. Nevertheless, even after they break off, they always come back and take another class or two as the larger cohort. And in this 5-year study, the students also thought highly of the executive model. And for those of you who haven't taught in our program or didn't know this already, we used to have classes like on a Tuesday night and then a Saturday morning. And so we got rid of the Tuesday night and changed it to a Friday night. So now the students, they come to class Fridays after work, and then they come Saturdays 9 to 5. What's been working since COVID is that Fridays because it's difficult and for them to drive at this hour, and many of them live far away. On Fridays, they Zoom. So it's been hybrid. So on Fridays, they can Zoom in 9 to 5, 5 to 9. But on Saturdays, we ask the students to come in person. And they come here and they take a class here on our campus at the main campus. And so far, that's been working. And then, so they take their core courses, like I mentioned, for the first year and a half. Then they take the qualifying exam. Then they break off and do their specialization courses with the smaller cohort. And then, of course, the dissertation is the product. They still have to show a product at the end and so forth. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the qualifying exam and the dissertation more specifically. Okay. This may or may not be pertinent anymore, but we still have a few students who are from cohort 13 and older. So the way we used to do it before was the students would they would pair off with their chair, and then they would work with their chair and their committee, and the committee would come up with the questions. So they would come in on a certain day. We have a couple of rooms here on the third floor. So we put them in front of a computer. There's no internet access. They don't have any belongings with them. And we give them the questions that their committee created for the student. Okay, so because we have a few people who haven't finished yet, who are from the older cohorts, we still do that. So if you have any of the older cohorts, you can always feel free to ask Karen or myself, or ask any one of us, Stacy or Candace, and we'll help you to do that. But for the most part, you all here are going to be working with the newer cohorts, so forth. And for the older cohort, the sample questions that the committee comes up with is based on their first 2 chapters, sometimes the first 3 chapters. It depends how you approach it. So, do any of you have students from the older cohorts that you know of? So, King, you have one.
I do.
Okay. Yeah, and Jacqueline does.
Okay, very good. Okay, so then, if you have any questions on how to deal with the older, just ask us and so forth.
They're
But
finishing this semester, so I'm
okay,
very
very good,
happy. Yeah.
very good.
And
So
I
the-
did, Enrique, I did drop in the chat, just for reference. We just started in the fall cohort 17, just so everyone is aware of where we are, because that previous slide mentioned cohort 13 and prior. We are now at cohort 17. So
So then
these will
4
be the
years.
individuals that are seeking chairs this spring, right now. Some of them might have reached out to you already. So they will be seeking chairs in the coming months if they haven't already reached out.
Cool.
Would
Very
it be would it be possible to have like a little chart? The year of the cohorts. And the reason why I'm asking this is sometimes I have to fill out some of the forms, and says what cohort is, like I don't know. So I need to go
Okay.
back. So maybe I can, if we say, okay, cohort this year is number 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever the number is, that will be helpful, I think. I think when we're filling up those forms.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we have a list here of all the students, and we always have to look up what cohort they are, because we have to keep in mind, depending on the cohort, the qualifying exam is different. But other than the qualifying exam, for the most part, the rest is the same. So that's why at least we make the distinction. And the reason why we changed the qualifying exam was based on a couple of reasons, but that's where people were getting stuck. That's where our students were getting stuck. Our students were doing everything. Many of them even went they took all their courses and they never took the qualifying exam. Why? Because it's something that they're supposed to work out with their chair and their committee. So we took that away from the chairs and the committee and said, okay, we as a program, we're gonna administer the qualifying exam. So they, as you can see here on the slide, they come in on a Saturday and they just knock it out in one day. And then once they finish and take qualifying exam, after we score them, they become candidates. So they start off as a student, and then after you take the qualifying exam, you become a doctoral candidate. And all it is a form that has to be filled out, but the university has different policies once you're already a candidate. That means you should be close to graduating once you're a candidate. So, and because of this qualifying exam, we could argue that our program is actually teaching what we're supposed to be teaching because they've been able to successfully pass the qualifying exam. So, anybody have any questions about the qualifying exam? You can kind of read it there. But you know, they come on a Saturday. There's 2 rooms on the 2nd floor. You know, I don't know, maybe Karen, Karen left, huh?
No, I'm here. I
Oh,
didn't
I see.
leave.
Okay, so I was like, we're here at the bottom.
I
Okay, do you
didn't
want to just
leave.
quickly just talk about, like, describe like what the comp looks like, the new comp?
Yeah, yes. So, and I see AJ said this exam scheduled 1.5 years after their start. Yes, that is correct, AJ. So it's really based on all the core courses that they've taken to date. So it is in December of their 2nd year. They take it early December of their 2nd year, and it's based on content from their courses over that first year and a half-ish. And so our core instructors provide questions to me, and I select questions out of a hat randomly. So I do not look at those questions. Questions are either for our K-12 group or our higher ed group. So I select 4 questions for the K-12, 4 questions for our community college higher ed group. Those 4 questions are then administered, sent to the students a month ahead of time. So they are allowed to then study those questions. On the day of the exam, they are given 3, which are, again, prepared ahead of time. So Candace helps me with that. I select 3 questions, again, out of the hat from those 4. Those are prepared for the students. So when they get to the computer, those 3 questions are already up on the computer for them. They respond to those questions. Those responses are then sent out. They were scored over winter break. That was something that I worked on all of winter break. Upon the students passing, which all of our students did this past December, we did have some that had to be triple scored, and which is okay, as long as we have 2 faculty that pass a candidate. So we did have some that had to be triple scored. That's okay, because 2 of the faculty did pass on particular questions. So all of those students then move to the candidacy. So they're advanced to candidacy, and they begin working on their dissertations if they haven't already. And I will say the students that I worked with, we'd already started the dissertation pre-qualifying exam, but I let them decide how much time and energy they put in because I did want them to study for the qualifying exam. So I don't know if there's any additional questions in regards to this, but this has to be passed in order for them to move into the candidacy. And again, as Enrique said, they all take it on the same day so that they can then move into the candidacy, ideally at the same time, to move forward in that dissertation process. So no one's getting held up and falling behind, if you will.
Can they
I
have
have a question.
any notes with them?
They cannot. They do not bring notes. Their phones are set in the middle of the room or up front in the room. They do not have anything on them other than a snack. So they need to, they met in groups, they studied, they prepared. Really, it's their opportunity to demonstrate their knowledge, skills, and abilities in relation to these problems of practice.
Thank you.
I have a
You're
question.
welcome.
Is there an expected length of each of the questions?
I did ask, I think, Sharon about this, and she had recommended maybe 2 to 3 pages, I think, if I recall, Enrique. Does that sound about
It
right?
sounds about right. It's just
Per question.
it's just
per
whatever they can
question.
do in 4 hours, you know.
Yes,
We
per
we have some
question.
students who after 3 hours they magically, okay, I'm done.
Yeah,
And we have other students who they're there up to the 4 hours and they're
I
sweating and they're like, you know, trying to,
I
you know.
didn't have anyone sweating, but maybe
Yeah.
in years maybe in years prior. Vipin is asking how many of the students who complete the coursework scheduled for 1.5 years are. So of our candidates that from cohort 16, all of them took the qualifying exam this past December from cohort 16. So none of them that were scheduled to take it did not. They all took it that were scheduled to take it. I hope, does that answer your question, Vipin?
Okay, so everything before the qualifying exam, we as the program, we work with the student directly. So we advise them, we tell them what forms they need to fill out, we do all sorts of, we hold town hall meetings, we hold group advising sessions, we hold individual advising sessions, we try to hold events where, you know, where there's opportunities to mingle with other cohorts. We try all sorts of things. But after they pass, once they finish and pass the qualifying exam, we turn them over to you all. So then now they become the responsibility of the chair. Now, that doesn't mean that we excuse ourselves. It just means that you as a chair, you have to start holding them a little bit more accountable. You know, email or a phone call. Hey, what's going on? Let me know how you doing, how things coming along. And if you have any questions, of course, you can always come back to us and, you know, we'll do as best we can to explain. But in terms of that accountability that comes, we found that students who if they get used to somebody asking them, how you doing? Are you progressing? And so just because they pass a qualifying exam, we're still in contact with the student, but that's when we expect you all as the chairs to be a little bit more active and engaged with them, to, you know, hold them accountable, make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. This is a 3-year program. But something that's different. Well, first of all, in our opinion, it's the most complicated program on campus because we have our own fee structure. We have our own kind of curriculum that's really faculty governed. We have bylaws. We're the only program that has a set of bylaws. And long story short, because of that, it becomes very complicated. And so between us as the program leadership and you as the chair, we want to make sure that we have this collaborative relationship so both of us can work together to make sure the students have what they need. One thing that differentiates ourselves from the rest of the campus is, whereas anywhere else on campus, any other program, the courses expire after 7 years. That tends to be a common thing across universities. The courses expire after 7 years. Our program, the courses expire after 5 years. And we remind the students, you're supposed to finish in 3 years, but if they don't finish in 3 years, you know, we try to make sure that we work with them to get an updated and realistic timeline of when do they plan to finish. make sure they cover all the milestones, and we let them know that after 5 years, their courses begin to expire. That seems to light a match under them. Oh, they didn't realize that. Of course, the way the legislation is built, that Karen and I, as faculty directors, we could make exceptions. So we've done that before. So let's say people's courses expire, we can make an argument that because let's say they're a teacher or they're a superintendent somewhere, because they're still in the field, we can make an argument that their knowledge of the field is up to date, right? So we can make exceptions, but of course we don't tell the students that. We tell them your courses expire after 5 years because they're supposed to finish within that 3-year, and then they have 2 years kind of, you know, to make up for if they're a little bit behind. But is there any questions on that? That's the part that's a little different.
Enrique, I just wanted to come back to a question that AJ asked in the chat in regards to if a student doesn't pass, when they can take it again. And AJ, I just want to call your attention to the second to last bullet. So if a student on this slide, if a student does not pass in the qualifying exam, they have one last chance. So they get a second chance. So new questions will be created for the questions that they did not pass, assuming there's more than one. But to my knowledge, we have not had to do that. Enrique, have pre me, did you and Sharon ever have you had to do that yet?
We've never had to dismiss anybody. They've always passed on the second time around, the few people
Excellent.
that they've
The
been.
few people that have had
Yeah.
to do the second time.
There
Good.
have been. I mean, there are some students that you read their qualifying exam and there's no way you could pass them. I mean, there's just, as much as we like the students,
Mhm.
we don't want to just give it away. You know,
Mhm.
I mean, so we have conversation. It's a difficult conversation to have, but we had a student not too long ago that we had to do that with. And then they tend to wake up and do every effort possible, and then they pass the second time around. So
Well, sorry if I may jump in.
yes,
I
please.
was wondering was that when is that second time? Is there a particular deadline on it? Like it has to be a month after?
We usually give them a few weeks, AJ, so that
Only
Yeah.
a few
we can
weeks?
prepare a month or so. We give them, I haven't been part of this process, so Enrique, you should speak, please.
Yeah, usually within a month or two. Because if we give them the qualifying exam in December, and then it's Christmas break and winter break, so we come back in late January. So probably the first week of February, we would do it again.
That
Yeah.
makes sense. Thank you.
And then something, if you were to ask me a few years ago, I would complain, why are there so many forms? The bureaucracy is just so heavy. But now that, for me, that I'm on this side of the curtain, I understand why. Because we need to track at what step is the student at any one time. So we rely heavily on these forms to let us know. And unfortunately, a few years ago, we had some issues where the forms were not properly stored and filed. But we have a whole brand new team, and part of what we've been doing this last year, even though some students, they told us, I already gave you that form. Yes, we know you gave us that form. But we've been asking students to give us forms again. And so now we have a system in place where we track all those things. But something you all need to know is that there's always a form for everything. So once you all take over as chairs, there's a form for picking your committee. There's a form and rubric for the proposal. There's a form for this, there's a form for that. So just be aware. Okay. we probably don't need to go into this, but this is just like a sample questions they come up with. If you happen to teach one of our core courses, which are the courses that are taught the first year and a half, then we will reach out to you ahead of time, or Karen will reach out to you ahead of time and say, give us a couple questions, and then you would give us sample questions. So I'll share the recording, and if you want to, I can share the PowerPoint, but at least the recording so we can move on. Okay. Oh, this is part of the same conversation, qualifying exam. So we, on occasion, there's a 0 from one reviewer, but then somebody else will give them a 2, right? So as long as it averages out, we need at least 2 out of the 3 people to give us a number 1, meets expectations. So that's how it's done. And we have rubrics. So if it was a question that you would be asking for one of the courses you taught, we would ask you for the rubric. That way, it's not just you, but it's somebody else besides you is scoring the qualifying exam. And then if there's disagreement on the first 2 people, then that's when we bring in the 3rd reviewer. Okay. Okay, so I don't know how you all work with this, but we found out that there's a couple things, and feel free to chime in, Karen, is that our students from this 5-year study are telling us that they have a hard time getting to know more faculty. They would like to get to know more faculty. So something that we're going to put on you all, we hope that you can make yourselves available. For example, we have our homecoming event. We have our back to school event. We're going to start these kind of meet the faculty events. We've had them before, but it's not as effective as we thought they would be. Our students are still telling us we need to be exposed more to the faculty, right? And sometimes the faculty they do talk to and meet, many of them are already, they say, oh, I can't do it, I'm too busy, or so forth. So we hope that you all are, and I'm actually very optimistic for the fact that so many people showed up today, that's telling me that you all here are willing to do this work with the students, because our program, people want our program to grow. And especially these people in our college and across campus, they're telling us, are we going to be an R2? Like, what's going on? This whole R2 has really sparked a lot of discussion, but we can't be an R2 unless we have so many graduates. We have to have at least 20 graduates. And we can't grow as a program unless we have enough people to serve as chairs. That's really what's been holding us back. We could, if we wanted to, we could bring in 30 people in the cohort. But we can't grow unless we have more people to serve as chairs. And that's kind of where we're at. We have to grow responsibly. Once you do meet with the student, it's sort of like an interview process, and you all, I'm sure, have already done this already with your students. It's an interview process, and you work with the student to then, the student's going to ask you, who should be my second reader, and who should be our third reader. The first reader is always a core faculty, somebody who works at CSUSB, and people like yourselves, for the most part, I think everyone here is a core or soon to be a core. You all are the first readers. Then the second reader is someone who's either core or an affiliate faculty. The third reader is someone from the outside, a community partner. As long as they have a doctorate, they can serve as the third reader, and it's somebody from the outside. And so anyways, you work with the students to establish their committee. You are the chair, so you want to make sure you pick a committee that's going to be able to work with you. You want to, I don't know if I'm making sense, but you don't want to bring in people that you maybe there's you've had problems with in the past or whatever, because it does create problems for the students. You need to make sure everybody on committee kind of gets along. I know that sounds very juvenile for me to say that, but you do have to have a committee that gets along. Everybody's there for the benefit of the student. And usually the student has a certain expertise, like parent participation, let's say. So sometimes you as the chair don't have that expertise, but you want to make sure that somebody on the committee does, right? For example, I'm not a quantitative person. So King is on a committee where I'm the chair, but I'm going to tell the student, go talk to King to make sure that your methods are what they're supposed to be, right? And sometimes I have the expertise, and so I'm there working with the student. It just depends on the topic. But my point here is that you have a committee, it has to be well-rounded, everybody has to get along, and there has to be enough expertise. So I guess what I'm saying is that you as a chair, you don't have to know everything, right? You don't have to, it's impossible for all of us to be experts in everything. But that expertise is supposed to be represented on the committee. So you got to work with the student to make sure that they have the right people that are going to give them the right kinds of advice and so forth. Right? Am I jiving? Am I making any sense? Or if not, just tell me if I'm not, so I know. Okay, thank you. I got the thumbs up. All right. These are just general guidelines. Again, many of you here already have been doing this for a lot of years. What works is regular meetings. I cannot understate that. So for example, for some of my students, we meet at least every 2 weeks. Even if it's for 10, 15 minutes, but it keeps the student on their toes. Because otherwise, what happens is that the student shares something with you, and if you don't have a regular meeting, well, I get caught up doing other stuff, Plus, these are grown adults, right? They're responsible for themselves, but they also get caught up in doing things. Our students tend to be older, they have careers, they have families, they have mortgages, they have medical emergencies, those kinds of things. But really what works is that every 2 or 3 weeks, if you even if it's for 15 minutes, but for half an hour, whatever you can spare, that really keeps the students on their toes. But it also keeps me as a faculty engaged, because we ourselves get caught up in doing so many things. We forget that we're supposed to also, sometimes we need to poke at the students, kind of say, hey, what's going on? And our students actually like the structure. Not every student, but 95% of the students, they like somebody to remind them and so forth. So I don't know if anybody wants to share a story or anything about this or what they do. These are just general advice, but I don't know if somebody wants to share. Becky just joined us. Becky has been very successful with doctoral students. Do you mind, Becky, sharing? What do you do? Do you meet with the students? Like, what works for you?
Yeah, I start off first. I mean, we set weekly meetings for about a half an hour just to get them started and get them making sure they have a regular routine of when they're going to be doing their dissertation work. Then we go to every other week. And then there's some parts, like when they're collecting data, we go a little bit further out, maybe every 3 weeks, something, because we don't need to meet as often because they're really busy with the interviewing or analyzing their data, but it's an as need basis. So they might say, oh, do you have 15 minutes today? And so then we check in. Then when they get close to the first proposal, I meet again weekly to make sure everything's in line. Then we go back a little bit further, and then their dissertation, we meet so that I can ask them questions, get them ready for their committee questions. So just, it all depends on variance of each of your students. Some will do that to themselves, and others you need to, like Enrique said, you need to prod them, poke them a little bit to get them going, and they appreciate it.
Very good. I think I saw Jacqueline had her hand up.
Yeah, very much similar to my schedule with students on a weekly basis also. And I send out reminders. And sometimes I know they might not have the time for a weekly meeting for a half an hour, 1 hour. But it just put them on the calendar that they have a meeting set up. They can text me and say, oh, I'm late, or I can just meet you 30 minutes. Or I said, me too, I'm just at 30 minutes, let's jump in and Zoom. So I set it up that way, and it gives them the routine to have something for you and pace their time also, because I'm flexible with my students, and they tell me, well, I cannot be here on this day and this day. I say, okay, and agree in what days you can. Particularly during the summer, it's more challenging to have a meeting with the students as well, but at the same time, it's a good time for them to collect data. Some students collect data during summer because they don't have to go to work in the morning, so that's an advantage for them, those who are teachers. So just working with a calendar that it works for them and keep it open every time. Text, phone call, email, Zoom meeting, whatever they'll prefer, like. I think it works very well. Check on them, how they're doing. Sometimes it's just me just to talk about how they're doing at work, and they just vent, and they need that. So we listen. And then other days, okay, let's do some work, and tell me your questions about it. So keeping that intentions of meeting regularly is very important.
Very good. And something I do is after students graduate, I've become friends with many of them, and they become like lifelong friends. But while they're a student, I'm just speaking for myself, I try to maintain a certain professionalism, because it really does help to have somebody remind them, but you can't get too close. You can't be too much of a friend. I mean, we're friends and colleagues, but usually it's like after they graduate. But during this time when they're our students, I try to keep it, I'm friendly, and I guess you could say we are friends, but I hold back a little bit to make sure I have enough, I don't know what to say, authority or something to make sure I'm doing my part to hold them accountable. Right. So thank you, Sharon. I see your thumb. You I guess you understand what I'm saying, right? Everybody kind of understands. Okay, so here's the general responsibility, and I'll speed it up. Okay. And I won't have to read everything, but you're responsible for guiding the candidate, right? You're going to work with them to define their topic and methodology. In my experience, I've found out that most students, well, I myself barely understand what it is to have a theoretical framework, right? So if I barely understand what it is to have a theoretical framework, our students are struggle. So we got to work with our students to identify frameworks, either conceptual or theoretical, that's going to help them. And of course, they always have questions about methodology, but the student has to have a topic that they are passionate about. So it can't be a topic that we would like for them, although of course we steer them, but we can't push them too hard into what are our interests. It has to be something that they want to do, because otherwise they lose interest. So they have to be passionate about their topic, and so forth. But ultimately they're adults, they're responsible for their own journey, but we kind of guide them. And we don't tell them, I'll speak for myself again, I don't tell them everything, but I do kind of point them in the right direction, and then they got it, and they little by little they kind of figure it out themselves what they're supposed to be doing. I meet with them, I make myself available to them. Sometimes it's psychological. They just want to meet with somebody to let them know so that they don't float away. After the student has finished their 3 years of coursework, if they go beyond those 3 years, it becomes very dangerous territory. And I'll tell you why. Because many of them tend to just float away. They no longer have their cohort. They no longer have classes where they can go to. And so this is the point where we've lost a lot of students. And so, especially after that 3 year, you as the chair, you got to like be more assertive with them and say, I need to have a timeline. I need to have I want chapters 1 and 2 by this date. But at the same time, you as the chair, you have to make sure you have the availability and that you're responsive. So if a student gives you something to read, don't take too long in responding, right? Because then that discourages them too, that, oh, my chair hasn't read my stuff and this and that. Many of them stop writing altogether until they get feedback. Of course, I tell them, no, go ahead, keep writing. But many don't. They want the feedback, and so forth. So, okay. By the first summer, okay, so students come in, and by that first year, they're expected to have a committee and a chair already. Okay. Any questions? Okay. Once the proposal is drafted, okay, so here's something very important. As chairs, we have to make sure there's no surprises. So we do not let students propose unless you think they are ready to propose. And for sure, we do not let them defend their final dissertation until you think and are sure that they are going to do okay and do well. Otherwise, it's like throwing them to the wolves. They have to really be prepared. And part of doing that is knowing where they are at all times, asking for updates and so forth. So for the proposal as well as the dissertation, you want to see several drafts beforehand. The way I do it, and of course, anybody else wants to chime in, I ask the student, give me chapters 1, 2, and 3. I want to see your final product. Then I read it. I give my feedback to the student, and then they improve on it. Once they've met all my what I've asked them to do, my suggestions, then I ask them to share it with the rest of the committee. The way I work is I don't have the student share it with the rest of the committee until I've reviewed it first. And then again, that's just the way I do it. So I review it and I tell, go ahead, share it now with your committee. The committee reviews it and they give responses. 2 weeks is the average. Of course, there's no real timeline, but 2 weeks is around the average time. If a student gives us something to read, we are expected within 2 weeks to respond back. And then we invite them to come in and propose their dissertation. After the committee says, okay, you have our permission, then we tell them, go ahead, apply for IRB. And then IRB could take a month, it could take 2 months. It just depends on what time of the year it is, what their topic is, and so forth. But at the point that they finally get IRB approval, only then and until then are they allowed to start collecting data. Okay, so they're not allowed to collect data until they have all the approvals. And then the same thing with their dissertation. I like to see the final, all 5 chapters. And then I look it over, I give my suggestions, and then I say, okay, now go ahead and share it with your committee. And then the committee gives their suggestions and their insights. And once the committee feels, especially you as a chair, but once the committee feels that the student is ready to defend their whole thing, then and only then do we allow them to schedule the defense. And that way there's no surprises. There's nobody, pissed off at us because they weren't told by their committee that they weren't ready, or and so forth. Anybody want to share anything at this point?
Enrique, I think you're right on. You have to have that communication with your committee, but you also have to understand the committee members, why they're committee members. When I first started this, I didn't consider that. And we ended up with 2 committee members on the opposite end, and I had to really facilitate so the student wouldn't get bogged down in their differences. So you want to make sure, why is this second chair there? What expertise are they going to add? And I usually add somebody with methodology if it's like quantitative. It's not my strong piece. And then the third committee member, I want somebody who's going to add to the field, the current field, to help with their dissertation. And by having those expertise, everybody has a role on their committee, and everybody tends to work together to get them to a really high spot. And I found that works the best for me.
Very good. All right.
And I just want to say that, Becky, that's my approach as well. Same line of thinking.
Cool. All right.
And Shannon, did you have your hand up?
I just want to say thank you for doing this, because this helps clarify a lot of things, even for myself, being a chair for the first time, working with 2 different students and 2 different approaches. It just made me, I'm just learning a lot. And this makes me think about things a little bit differently. And I also think of a PhD versus my experience, right? So, well, let me speak for myself, the self-motivation, and you had to do all these things that were, in my case, that were expected of me. So I guess this just really helps clarify a lot of things for me.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and we know every student is different, right, Shannon? So I'm glad that this is helpful. Thanks for sharing that. And always reach out with any questions, always, to Enrique and myself, and Candace and Stacy. Please communicate any questions that come up, concerns, etc.
And a lot of this is, I guess, what they call professional judgment. It just comes from on-the-job learning over the years. You just kind of learn, you just become to approach it a certain way. Oh, I see Becky had your...
Yeah, Becky.
I was just going to say, I tried to build the accountability that this is their journey, their dissertation. I do not set up the calendar invites, but if they don't know how to do it, I make them learn how to set up a calendar invite. It's their responsibility. They set up the Zoom link. And the reason I have them set up the Zoom link, because I have them record every session. So they don't have to worry about taking notes. They can go back and listen to it. And that seems to help. But I build that accountability for their dissertation by them, setting up the meetings, the times, figuring out your schedule, what's going to work for you. And I think it gives them a sense of, I'm leading this.
Okay, I see another hand.
Thanks for that, Becky.
Yeah, yeah.
Can I go ahead?
Yeah,
Yes,
Pippin,
yes.
go ahead.
Okay. Enrique, you have discussed about the team dissertation model in the past. So I was wondering, has anybody done a team dissertation model? Is that model still being considered? I remember that was discussed by you in one of the meetings.
Yeah, we have, you talking about like maybe doing something different than the standard 5-chapter?
Yeah, like a couple of students jointly collecting maybe comparative data or things like that.
Oh, yes, yes, yeah, like we haven't had anybody who's done it. I'm open to it, but we as a faculty, the way the bylaws is set up is that we as a faculty have to make certain policy and type of decisions. But I'm open to it. Like for example, I know of other institutions where, let's say there's a group of 2 or 3 students that they work on a joint project and they're collecting data. But as long as each student interprets and uses part of the data, you know, separately, in other words, so it's a different dissertation altogether, even though they're sharing the data. I think that's perfectly legit. We had a student, Jacqueline, we had a student who wanted to write their dissertation in Spanish because their Spanish is their dominant language.
Yeah.
I couldn't find anything that said no, because after all, the first Constitution of California is in Spanish. And so there's, but then the problem is socializing faculty into thinking outside of that 5-chapter. But if we can break ourselves out of that mindset, we could be doing all sorts of stuff. We could be doing projects. I mean, I don't know, you still have to have a written product, but it doesn't have to fit the exact, 5-chapter thing. Maybe there's alternatives, but we as a faculty have to decide and make sure it passes all the, I mean, I don't know, I would have to look into it. We have faculty governance, but we don't have complete faculty governance. I'm sure the faculty senate would have, or maybe the graduate studies would not accept it. I don't know.
Yeah, it's not necessarily our decision to make. There's other bodies involved, so. And I see that Angie has her hand up. Go ahead, Angie.
I was just gonna ask about like the 3-paper dissertation, especially if you did one for a practitioner journal, as an option, but also just an example I've seen, this was actually at a Research One university for tenure, where they allowed somebody to create a website, a really extensive website. Instead, normally in that field, they would have to publish a book. And instead, this person did this extremely extensive website for tenure.
That's
Just as a
fascinating.
cool idea
Yeah.
that would
yeah.
actually be more applicable, because they worked with
Mhm.
indigenous populations and put up all kinds of music examples and explanations.
Fascinating. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I think there'd be a lot of individuals we'd have to speak to. But definitely something we are exploring, because CPED really does align itself with exploring other options to the 5-chapter dissertation. And since we're aligned with that, but yeah, food for thought for moving forward in these spaces.
Mhm.
Thanks, all.
And yeah, something like action research, I think fits perfect. Like, let's say you're working for a school district and you're doing some kind of research where it involves students and maybe faculty, administrators from the school, and you're creating interventions to improve the school. Well, why can't that be your proof that you've earned your doctorate, maybe you could just take the elements of it and present it in a way that's acceptable in this kind of academic you know, the requirements of the academy. But as far as I'm concerned, that's legitimate, you know. But that's another conversation. But yeah. Okay. We don't need to talk about the dissertation defense, but just know if you have any questions about what happens on the day of the dissertation defense, please feel to reach out to us. It's more or less, it's 2 hours. Because of COVID, we started doing things over Zoom, and ever since COVID, we still allow the option if a student wants to do it, hybrid. We've had third members who work off campus. Maybe they're in a different country or something. So anyway, so it's a hybrid. It's okay. We're okay with that. Then the student gives a half hour, 20 minutes or half hour, usually a PowerPoint, and they talk about all the elements of their dissertation. And then the committee takes turns asking questions. They're the only ones who ask questions. Other people can be there to listen in, but nobody else is asking questions, it's just the committee asking questions. And then after you've done the round robin of questions, then the committee meets privately, and then they just talk about what are their concerns, what are their issues, and they could decide to pass the student with yes, the student should be commendated, or yes, they met all the requirements, or yes, but they need to do this, this, and this. And so it could go either way. Hopefully, like I said earlier, there's no surprises. But there has been times where the committee has asked the student, okay, we'll sign off, but we want you to do this, this, and this, and they're very serious about it, and they're not gonna sign the final thing until you do what they asked for. Sometimes the committee says, here are suggestions, but it's not contingent. You know, it's just suggestions. But you know, you've done enough in our eyes. In my experience, I've never known a student to fail their dissertation. I guess it's possible, but we don't want to ever put a student in that position. All right. Jacqueline, you had your hand up?
Yes, just want to add to what you were saying. It's so important, this part that you bring it up. There will be perhaps, I hope not, but we also be realistic that some students feel that they can trap you and say, well, if you don't let me graduate, then I quit, or I'm going to change dissertation chair. And the only thing that you want is to be sure that they complete their assignment. So I was reading in the chat, and yeah, there had been some issues in that regard. Also signing off, like that you give them some feedback after the dissertation proposal, the first part, and then they don't submit that the feedback within the time that you ask them, and then just keep dragging. So that's going to drag also the time where they will propose for, or they will do the defense. So if they haven't completed the requirements that you and your committee said they needed to do in order for you to move forward, then I think it's also a matter of have a student be accountable and be very clear that you are not in that game. You know, as the educator and with that degree, how challenging can be and how difficult can be for a student. I think we all experience those feelings, but if our faculty committee member says we need to meet these deadlines, we meet those deadlines, right? And it will happen. I'm pretty sure there will be some instances that some students might feel that way. So yes, it's very important that what you were saying, Enrique, if the student doesn't meet the requirements that you ask them, I'll suggest to talk to the team and come up with a plan. Because yes, some students can manipulate and can think that they can get away and then just pass, just without completing the requirements or the editing or the rough draft. They just want to submit a rough draft. So I think that was important that you mentioned it. I think it's very important, Ricky.
And every case is different. When I
Yeah.
got my doctorate, my committee wanted me to change a few things at the end. I didn't have the energy. I was like I was exhausted. So it took me a second to catch my breath, and then I was able to be the right frame of mind to come back and make those changes. They didn't make it. It wasn't like a pass or no pass. I mean, it wasn't like a condition. But of course, you want to please your committee, and you want your committee to be proud to sign their name, right, on your dissertation. Yeah. Becky?
Yeah, I've had situations, so you give suggestions as a chair, and it's their dissertation. But if you're struggling, maybe they're not making those changes or they don't quite understand, I always refer back to the second reader for support, and ask them to take a look at it. And almost every single time they come back with the same comments I've been giving the students. And it just reinforces that, see, I'm trying to get you to pass to make sure, no, I didn't talk to them. And sometimes when I've done that, it's like we need to restructure, a certain section because it just didn't read smoothly. And of course, there's like tears, but then they're like, you're right. It made my dissertation better. So it's just a matter of sometimes your voice might not be it. So rely on that second reader. Their voice sometimes can really make things move along quicker.
Cool. Okay. I skipped a few slides because we had kind of already talked about that stuff, so I figured we didn't need to do that. One thing I do want to reiterate, now, of course, you can if you wanted to, but something that we learned over the years, technically the student is not doctor until they post their transcripts, until the final changes are made. And commonly we say, congratulations, let me be the first to call you doctor, or something like that. Which you can do that, that's perfectly fine. But we're not supposed to, because there have been situations. For example, we have a student, I won't say who, I won't give their name, but we have a student who, it's been almost a year now, and they haven't, or at least 7 months, they passed their dissertation on social media and everywhere, their doctor, they may have even got a pay raise, whatever, but they haven't finished the last thing that's needed for it to be official. So I just caution you, just so you know, you do what you want, but I'm just like a cautionary thing. And of course, there's a lot of paperwork that has to be signed over. So make sure to work with Candace or Stacy, but normally just Candace, and so forth. Anyway, so that's the basics there. Okay. Okay, so let me talk about compensation then. Links to forms and general information. Okay, so you're probably wondering, okay, what credit do I get for being a dissertation chair? Okay, so if your cohort's 13 and older, this was when, remember, you as the chair are working with the student to do their qualifying exam. So that's where you would get that 1 unit. for helping them with pass their qualifying exam. When the student finishes, not just finishes the defense, but they actually do all their paperwork, and the university or the state of California has conferred upon them their degree. When all that's done, then you have earned 1 unit if you're the chair for the proposal, and then 2 units if you're the chair, half a unit if you're the second reader. The third reader, because they're an outside community partner, there's no way for us to give them credit, like course release or anything. We send them a nice certificate and that they put in their dossier for their service to the profession. Under the new system, the qualifying exam part is eliminated, but the rest is the same. So once the student graduates, you get 1 unit for their proposal, and then 2 units if you're the chair, and then a half a unit if you're the second reader. Were there any questions on that part?
So is that a total of 2 units or a total of 3 units?
A total of 3 units if you're the chair. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You just can't claim the proposal until they've finished, everything. Which
the
is
credits the
equivalent to a
same?
course release, right? It's a course release. Yes, I heard. Oh, King, yes.
The credits, are they the same for like me outside of a college vet?
Yeah, so what we would do is that we would pay off your department or your program. So okay, so King, you get 1 course release. We would, out of our budget, we would, send. It's not a physical check, but it's almost like a transfer, like a money transfer. We just, from our account, it goes into that account, and you get a course release. So, okay, just one clarification. For the students' credit, it's 4 units that they get. So like for a class, for the students, on the student side, it's 3, right? But for our faculty, it varies on the person. So we've had people who try to co-teach, and it's created a little bit of problems for us. The best thing to do is, when you're ready to claim your units, you come to Candace, or you come to one of us, and we'll put you in contact with Candace, and then we keep a running schedule of everything, and then you tell us what you want to do, and then we'll work with your department or your program to make sure you get that course release. Okay, we have a bunch of forms, which we won't go into now, but these if you go to our website, the EDD website, actually, you know what? Let me stop here. If you go to our EDD website, okay, so we go here to our EDD website. There's, for current students, there's all sorts of things that we ask them to fill out, and they have access to everything here. All right. But for you all here as program faculty, you go to that link, and then here you have all the forms that need to be done, right? Well, for our program, it's just the syllabus. But for our current students, or is it under resources? Let me see here. Let me go to
I think it's under
previous.
students, Enrique.
It's under current students. Okay, it's
Yeah.
under current students.
I think so.
Yeah, so under program information, there it is.
Mhm.
Each cohort has their own set of guidelines. They're pretty much 95% the same, but sometimes we change things here and there depending on what improvements we're making to the program. So the students are bound to their guidelines. And before they start the program, we bring them all in for a 1 day, full day orientation. And I don't know if Karen, if you want to mention anything about that, but we explain to them as much as their brain allows it, because we try not to overwhelm them with too much too soon. But they are bound to these guidelines. We let them know it's a 3-year program. We talk about the courses. Well, go ahead, Karen, if you want to talk about.
Well, I know it's 6:30 and we had said we'd finish at 6:30, so I just want to be respectful of people's
This
time.
is the last
That
thing,
was all.
then we'll be
Okay.
done.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, we do have a full day orientation for our new cohort, which again was cohort 17, where we walk through what the program looks like over the course of their 3 years and really try and ground them into what an EDD looks like here at CSUSB, and give them time to get to know their community, their cohort members, and us as a EDD collective. So it's an opportunity for them to come together in community and spend the day together. And they do get the handbook for their cohort. So you'll see that here with cohort 17, the doctoral program guidelines.
Very good. Okay, are there any questions? Otherwise, I think we're done.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We appreciate you being here. And Enrique will be sending this out to all of you and posting it to YouTube for others to reference and refer to as needed. And of course, you can come back and watch it multiple times to support you in your support of our students. So thanks all.
Or maybe when you can't fall asleep and you need something to make you
That was
sleepy.
a good one.
There you go.
Okay,
Oh my
all right,
goodness.
well,
Have a
Thank
good
you
night.
all. Have a
Thank
good
you.
night.
Bye. Mhm. Thanks.
let me see if I can stop
So say, do
recording
you want to stop
first.
recording?